can, it should be starting the recording. I'm going to turn off the transcription part of things here. Okay, I think I did that successfully. All right. So good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started here. My name is Kevin Unrath. I'm a consultant for library operations here at the Department of Libraries. Before that, I was a director at a couple of libraries in Vermont for the last decade, and then before that, working around the United States. I have done a few facilities projects and certainly done a number of projects throughout my time. And so I look forward to sharing that knowledge and some of the research that I did to talk about project management. So that being said, we'll move forward. And if at any point you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat or to raise your hand. So we're going to look at facilities management through the lens of project management. Really, this session is sort of a twofer in a way. First, we're going to talk about project management, when that's useful, when it isn't. And then we're going to use creating a facilities management plan as kind of our example project. That's how we'll get at that aspect of things. So hopefully, if you're here either to learn how to successfully navigate projects or to look at facilities, you'll get a little bit of both during this session. So our learning objectives: when to use project management. We're going to look at project management systems and sort of in general how they function, and then that idea of a facilities management plan. First of all, in order to do project management, you do need to have a project. And so we'll start with the definition of what a project is and what it isn't. And this definition comes from the Project Management Institute, which is the national accreditation organization for certified project managers. So a project is a series of structured tasks, activities, and deliverables that are carefully executed to achieve a desired outcome. They are temporary efforts to create value through unique products, services, and processes. So that's a very generic definition of a project. I want to go into the language there a little bit more to talk about what separates a project from ongoing work. First of all, projects are temporary. They should have a start date and an end date. So if this is ongoing work, that's probably not a project. Projects are also discrete. They have they're separated from kind of the regular mission and work of the organization, and they're a separate effort that's either going to change the organization, move it in a different direction, or will add to what is already happening, but they have that kind of discrete from the regular work of the organization. And finally, they're resource bound. They use a limited amount of resources. And I think the easiest way to think about that is to think about the difference between a capital budget and an operating budget. So every year, libraries typically have an operating budget through which they operate. And then some years, libraries will have a capital budget that they're working on for a project. You could, of course, be working on a project that is using resources from that operating budget. But if you're doing that, you're most likely not going to be doing some other things that you were using those resources for in that operating budget, whether that's staff or money or time. So that's I think, an important distinction. And so using our example of a facilities management plan, creating that plan, which we're going to talk about today, that would be a project. But then the ongoing implementation of that plan for years into the future, that's not a project. That's part of the work you're doing. So I hope that makes sense. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about a project. And so project management, and again, this is utilizing a resource from the Project Management Institute. Project management is using your knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to complete a series of tasks that deliver value and achieve a desired outcome. Sounds like a lot of corporate speak, but if you have led a team in a time-bound way to achieve a goal, then you've already done project management. That is essentially what the activity of project management is. So what my goal is here, introducing you to project management, is to give you kind of a framework to think about the process of managing projects more intentionally, and hopefully, as you look at that framework, to be able to do it a little better. We're always doing projects, whether it's a building project, a new program that's being offered, a strategic plan that we haven't done before. It's something that I think librarians are pretty adept at because we wear lots of hats. But I think stepping back and looking at the process as a whole can be helpful to see where maybe you could put a little more effort. So I'm going to talk about project management methods, both specific methods and a general framework. And I'm going to focus on the general framework, first of all. There are lots of specific project management methods that are trademarked, that folks follow in different industries. So Six Sigma, you may have heard of as a process improvement, and sometimes people use it for project management. Prince2, projects in controlled environments, as a project management standard. A CSM, or a certified Scrum Master. That's a real name for a certification you can get to be a project manager. A PMP, or a project management professional, is a credential that one can get. These are all fancy titles for things that I don't think any of us really plan on doing unless we're transitioning in our career from a librarian to a project manager. So I'm not going to focus on that vocabulary of project management that's been created in the professional literature, but instead I'm going to talk about some of the methodologies that all of these various systems of project management share. And I'm really focused on a continuum of two, from more structured, which is what I'm calling the waterfall method, to less structured, or an agile method. So a waterfall methodology for project management is very linear, very sequential, follows a rigid structure where each phase of the project is completed before you move on to the next phase. So you're going to gather information, design a plan, implement it, test it, deploy it, maintain it. So very predictable. It also requires a lot of pre-work and documentation. And I'll give you an example of what a typical waterfall style project is, and that would be a construction project. So you're working on a new addition to the library. And so the first phase of that project would be getting that community input that you need before moving on to securing funding for the project. That would be the next phase. Then working with an architect to create plans. Then having a construction firm, or maybe you're doing design build, I don't know, but move on to laying the foundation, constructing the floors, putting in the plumbing. Then you'd move on to interior design, the finishing touches, then opening the building. That's kind of, you have to do one before you do the other, before you do the other, before you do the other. So that's an example of a project that really falls very sequentially. The advantages are it's very structured. I think a lot of folks in the library world like that sort of structure. Produces a predictable result. But the downside, of course, is that every phase in the future is dependent on the phases in the past to be successful. And if you make changes, especially changes early on, then you're throwing everything into a somewhat of a state of confusion, and you have to adjust quite a bit of planning that you've already done. So the other method, and I found this method to be used more in development of software. A lot of folks, I have a brother who's a computer programmer, and they use this agile method for the programs they create, but also developing smaller projects or parts of projects or new programs. So an agile project management method is iterative, flexible. It's a team that comes together and builds a project and then tests it and continues to build it again and again until it's exactly what they want. So there's a continuous feedback loop and an iterative creation of the final product. And an example that I came up with in the library world for what you might do for a agile project that you're creating would be a new music and movement story time that you want to do. So if you were to choose to implement this new story time and you were to choose an agile style of project management for implementing it, what you would do for that first section of the project, and those are called sprints. So as you work in an agile project management environment, you're sprinting to your first iteration of the project. You would figure out a time you wanted to offer it, say Saturday mornings. You would figure out who's going to staff it, and you'd figure out where you're going to host it. And then you would just do it. You would get there, you would do you would have the instruments you would have a soundtrack, and you would offer the program. And then you would ask whoever showed up to give you feedback on what they thought of that music and movement story time. I don't think any of us plan a program that quickly and just do it. Maybe we do. But the key element to this kind of agile project is getting that feedback for that first iteration of the project that you offered, and then taking that and revising the work that you did. So maybe the feedback you received was that Friday morning wasn't a great time to offer it because kids were in school and parents were working. So maybe Saturday morning was a better time to offer it. Maybe buying instruments that are better suited for little hands would be good because you had, I don't know, a xylophone and some other instruments, and maybe those little egg shakers are things that the toddlers who showed up instead of the younger elementary school kids you were thinking about could better utilize. Maybe you received unsolicited feedback from a person who was around the corner that this was a real noisy program that they didn't like happening while they were trying to read their book. And that feedback could go towards maybe finding a room where you can close the door, or finding a time when it wasn't so busy with folks that are in that space to offer a what turned out to be a somewhat loud program. So you would take all that feedback, you would revise the program you were offering, and you would offer it again. And then you continue that loop until you thought you had reached the point where that program was exactly what you had hoped it would be. So that sort of putting something out there rather than nothing in a kind of quick and dirty way, and then taking feedback to improve it as you go is the agile project methodology. The plus sides are you get out there whatever you're trying to do right away. The downside, there's a lot of chaos involved in that. So you're probably not offering a great project. That first iteration is not going to be the final result. So you have to build in time to really develop. And also, you don't really know when the endpoint is with an agile project. You may create something that you think is pretty good, but maybe there's no real like decisive endpoint necessarily. So, and I think most projects that I've run into really combine those two extremes. So you tend to have some moments when you have a more structured sequence of events, and some moments that are more agile, kind of brainstorming and iterations. And that's what you might call a hybrid form of project management. So a real world example of that might be the creation of that facilities management plan that is going to help you maintain and manage your physical plant and grounds in a more effective manner. So you might start off with the waterfall methodology. You might have step A, looking at that facility and documenting what you're currently doing. Step B could be reviewing facilities management plans that you've acquired from other libraries after you put a note out on the listserv, maybe reviewing plans that are in the library literature, some of which I'll introduce in a little while. So doing a literature review. And then step C could be performing a gap analysis on the difference between where you currently stand in your facilities plan and where the ideal facilities management plan, or what the best plans that are out there in terms of what you've reviewed from your peers and what you've seen in the library literature. So all of that is a linear approach. And then maybe you switch to a more agile approach where you take that gap analysis that you've created and make a first plan of what might work well for your library. And at that point, there's going to be some realities that come into play in terms of the staffing that you have, the money that you have, the time that you have, what this other stakeholders are who you haven't talked to yet about the plan think, and that would be your staff, the people in the town that may help with the facilities, your trustees, if you're the library director. Um, and so at that point, you're going to take that plan and sort of shop it around and do some updates and iterative improvements as you talk to folks for feedback. And once you've done that, you're going to put that plan into effect probably in the next fiscal year, because you have to wait to get maybe some funding for it or figure out how to get funding. And then you're going to look at that in a year or two to see how it's going. So that's sort of a combination between that more of a linear waterfall, one pool of water fills and another pool of water fills, and a more agile approach where everybody is jumping in the pool at the same time. So let me pause for a minute and see what questions you have before we move on to key project stages. See a few more folks have joined us too. For those folks who have just joined, we are recording this session. If something comes up that is sensitive, we will not share the recording. Otherwise, we will. I will make sure to share these slides with everybody who's attended. So just a heads up. All right, no questions at this point. Well, we'll keep going. Um, this is a list of key project stages, regardless of what sort of planning method you're using, whether it's a waterfall structured, whether it's more agile, or whether it's a hybrid. These are all things that you'll do as part of your project. And that it's broken down really into 4 stages. I used the book Fundamentals of Library Supervision, which had a great chapter, nice, quick, and easy chapter on project management. And that book, by the way, is in our professional development collection, so you can borrow it via ILL if you want to. We have a great collection of materials. We have one on project management in libraries and museums, which is also great, very in-depth. So the key stages: initiation, planning, execution, and close down. So the initiation is really a large scale identifying what the scope and complexity is of the project, what are your parameters, and what is that major end goal. So you figured out you need to do something about X, Y, or Z. You need to have a facilities management plan. And what are those very basic steps to get that going? So who is going to be on the project team? What is your deliverable on a large scale, in this case, a plan? And um, why do you need to do what you're planning to do? So that's initiation. Planning is really the meat and potatoes of project management. That's where you're going to spend most of your time when you're thinking about how to do a project. So taking that end goal, let's say establishing that facilities management plan, what are the objectives and the deliverables that are to come out of that? So what are the results of that? And a deliverable is going to be the plan itself, which will likely be written down, but also the resourcing to make that plan happen. How much money will it cost? Um, and who are the people whose jobs might be impacted by it? Rewriting job descriptions or bringing folks in on part of a team of facilities management, excuse me. And then also in planning is taking those objectives and breaking them into measurable steps and goals for achieving them. So setting up those steps that take your goal writ large and break it down into ways you can accomplish it. Along with that, I didn't list it here, but I think at this stage you also develop a communications plan. So how you're going to talk to both internal stakeholders, so the staff, the board, uh, funders, about what you're doing and what this change is, and then how you're going to talk to external stakeholders. When I worked on our library building in Shelburne, when I was director there, we did have a good number of residents who were concerned about the impact of the library bond on their taxes. And we spent a lot of time thinking about what our communication strategy would be, working with both folks who may be funders for the project and also folks who had legitimate concerns about how much it was going to cost. And that was time well spent. So a little bit of communication strategy is good to have in that planning. Next, developing what your resources are. We're going to, by the way, look at an actual plan in a little bit. So we'll get down to brass tacks. But your resources, including the time that it's going to take, anticipated budget, what supplies you're going to need, what equipment you're going to need, things such as that. Now, at this point, you have that list of goals, you have those resources. You want to take those and think about what the risks could be that are involved in that plan as you have it set up. So are there budgetary risks in terms of not having the money that you'll need to accomplish the project? Are there risks in terms of what the time frame is and things that could set you back time-wise, if it's a time-dependent goal? Are there negative impacts internally? Will this be something that will staff, trustees, customers, patrons may not fully embrace? So just taking some time at this point to write down what some of those anticipated risks might be, and that gives you a chance to right there do a little bit of revision to try to tackle those. And finally, establishing controls, which is very simple. It sounds weird, but it's a very simple concept, and that's taking that plan to the management and to the stakeholders after you've thought it through for review and approval to make sure everybody is on the same page, because you don't want to set up a plan that the scope of, the duration of, the final outcomes aren't really what folks were looking for. So the planning is really the hardest phase, I think, in project management, and it's going to take, it may not be the longest time-wise, but it's going to take, I think, the most effort to get everything together. And then execution is simply following that plan. If you've done the planning successfully, that execution should be pretty streamlined. But you do need to prepare to change horses in midstream if you run into surprises. So you might have some timeline adjustments. You might have new specs. You might have to scrap parts of the project that don't have resources available. So the time or the people or the funding. But execution is following through that plan. And then finally, close down, having an endpoint, notifying folks when the project is concluded. I think this is obvious if it's going to be something like a new building. You're opening the new building. You do the ribbon cutting, you have the big scissors, you've completed the project. But if it's something like that new story time we were talking about earlier, or a facilities management plan, it may not be as obvious that you've concluded the project, especially if it's more of that agile project management. So deciding that it's done, and then notifying folks, and then checking in again with your internal and your external customers or patrons about whether it's useful, how you might improve it. So what questions do you have at this point? Feel free to raise your hand if you want to chime in or type in the chat. All right, we'll keep going. I'm going to talk a little bit about Gantt charts. Has anybody seen one of these charts before in action? They're a classic for Dan. You know a Gantt chart. Thank you. We're going to look at a few different examples of Gantt charts, but I was curious because I did not know the history of the Gantt chart, why it was called a Gantt chart. It is named after Henry Gantt, who was a mechanical engineer and social scientist, and it has been around since the 1910s. They used it on infrastructure projects at first. So when they built the U.S. interstate highway system, there was a giant Gantt chart. When they built the Hoover Dam, they had a Gantt chart. It is the most widely used tool for project scheduling and management. And this is a very simple example of a Gantt chart. You'll see it's a bar graph, and there's tasks that are listed going down a column on the left. And then typically there's a timeline that goes across the row on the top for when those tasks need to be accomplished. So it's illustrating in a way that your plan probably also has, but this is a more visualization of it, how a project is proceeding forward. And if you are working on a project with a construction firm or a software firm or other major large-scale project, you'll see they'll have a Gantt chart for it, most likely. If you are doing a project on your own, you can use one of these if you want. You don't have to, but it's something that's good to know about. Let me show you an example of a Gantt chart for our facilities management plan. I put this together so we could consider the example that we're looking at for what you might do. And in this case, this is really I would say it's more the waterfall, the process oriented than it is an agile plan for facilities management. We're not going to just get a few people together and decide these are the 5 things we need to do and go do them and then pull everybody back in to see what we forgot. This is more from a beginning to an endpoint. So the first step that we might take in developing a facilities management plan would be to document our current facilities management practices. So what are we currently doing to manage the building and the grounds? And then to review some plans from other libraries and to research the professional literature that might list some examples of plans that are out there. So you can see those steps here, and you can see that I've given them a start date and an end date and the progress that I've made on them. This is another typical way that Gantt charts are implemented. You'll have time frames, and then you'll have when they're supposed to be completed and how much work you've done towards them. And then in the chart, obviously, the green is what's been done. The white is time that hasn't happened yet, or how far along in the project we are, and then the red is what still needs to be completed. And then the key for this one is we've used months, so this would be January, April, July, October, and then next February. So that's an example of a Gantt chart for creating a facilities management plan. And just to keep going with this, you're going to write that preliminary report once you have the gap analysis of what you're maybe not doing that most other libraries are doing. And then you're going to bring that, if you're the library director, to the trustees, to the staff, to contractors to review, get some cost estimates, revise that plan based on what the needs are that folks identified who you were talking to and what your resources are. Are you going to be asking for more money to do, for example, hire a contract cleaning service, which is something we ended up doing after we did a facilities management plan at a library, and then implementing and then revising again. So this is an example of how you might use a Gantt chart for your planning. Let me jump over to another example. I'm going to see if I can stop sharing this presentation and share a construction management Gantt chart just to see what those look like. All right. Can everybody see this general construction project management Gantt chart example? And the chart itself is over here in terms of the visualization. But I wanted to show you this because, first of all, if you're going to be working on a facilities project, it's good to see one of these ahead of time to see how detailed they are. And second of all, there are some elements to this particular chart that were not in the more simple chart that I just showed you. So I wanted to just spend a little bit of time here to talk about some of the other elements you might find. One of those are detail costs. So that's one of your resources, is how much money it's going to cost for that step in the project. And that's something that you can include in your planning. Another is, I don't know why they say resources instead of people, but in this case, the people that will be involved in that particular portion of the project are listed. And finally, I want to jump over to the chart itself. You see the little yellow diamonds that are here, that's a fancy way of indicating different steps in the project. So if we follow one of those back over from right here, we follow that over, we'll see that that is what is between the pre-construction part of the project and procurement. And then if we follow over from procurement over to construction, I think we'll likely see another one of those right there. So those are indicating a point at which the project switches from one phase to another phase, which is something that on a large scale project like this, you'll find useful. I think there's another one right at the end when you've closed out the project. So, all right, let me get back into my PowerPoint. But what questions do you have at this point while I'm loading that PowerPoint back up? Feel free to unmute and just jump back in too. Sorry, I closed it all the way out there.
Hi, you're right. This is Myrna. Do you see many projects that use a fancy chart like that one, Kent? From
For
library,
construction
small
projects,
libraries?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of construction projects use the Gantt charts because that's a standard in the construction industry. And I would say if you have a contractor who's coming to do work, probably not. That would be something that's to get to your question, Dan. At what point does it make sense to do a detailed plan like that? If someone's coming to fix your elevator, probably not. If you have a $500,000 or $1 million project that involves several steps and you have a general contractor who has subcontractors, most likely they're going to want to have a chart such as that to make sure at the minimum that they schedule their subcontractors in the correct order. So in terms of a construction project, anything that involves, I would say, more than a couple of subcontractors will likely have a chart like that. I would say another kind of a breaking point where you would employ a Gantt chart would be if you had a cost estimator on a project, because they would want to be able to break down the estimates into the different sections of the project. So anytime you're employing someone to estimate the cost, I think it's useful. Does that answer your question, Myrna?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't think we have any of those big projects yet, but yeah, it was a little intimidating seeing all that. Whoa.
No, yeah, and you know, it's really a tool, and it's not. I would say you're drawing that from the report. So another way to think about it that would make sense to me would be go ahead and write something up, whether it's 1 page or 20 pages, about the project that you plan on implementing. And if it seems like that visualization will make it clearer to folks who in terms of the way the resources, the time, the people are participating, then I would go ahead and spend the time on the chart. But if it's really already clear from what you have, then I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. And Sarah, yes, good steps to use. Yeah, a strategic plan, I think, especially if you're creating a new strategic plan and you haven't really had one before, that is absolutely something that project management can help you with. But also if you're revising your strategic plan, or if you're taking a new approach to it, then yes, that's a very good point, Sarah. So the most important part of any project, that chart I showed you, remember it had resources. I think that's silly to call people resources. Call them people. And this also comes from Beth McNeil's book. But people are the most important part of any project. And you might not have all of these groupings on every project you're doing, but this is a general structure for considering the team of people that might be working on a project. First of all, your top leadership. These are the people that oversee the funding and leadership for the umbrella organization. So this could be, depending on the structure of your library, the town manager and select board, the library board chair, the select board chair. So Whoever really is the leadership for your umbrella organization might be that top leadership. And then your project sponsor is the person who has financial and the decision-making authority that they can grant to the project manager. A lot of times in a library environment, the project sponsor is a subcommittee of the board. So if you're working on a major project, whether it's a strategic plan, whether it's a new suite of programming that you're going to be offering, not just one program, but a whole new direction, whether it's a building project, oftentimes the board will create a subcommittee that ends up serving that role to grant authority to the project manager to move forward at different stages. And then that project sponsor and the project manager will then bring major decisions up to the top leadership. Next, the project manager, which in this case I'm supposing is the folks who are here, although this is great also to think about being a part of a project team. If you are a library director at a smaller library, you're likely going to be the project manager. If you're at a larger library, you might delegate a member of the team to serve as the project sponsor, and you might end up being the project, or to serve as the project manager, and you might end up being the project sponsor. But that's the role of the person who's really coordinating everything. And then obviously the project team. So everybody that needs to be involved successfully. That could be contractors, that could be staff, that could be volunteers, some of the trustees. And finally, your patrons or your customers, who the project is directly serving. And I called out customers from other stakeholders because oftentimes there are people in addition to just the library users who have some skin in the game. So everyone in town, as an example, for the building project that we worked on in Shelburne, everyone in town was a stakeholder, whether they were a library user or not, because they were going to be paying for the bond that produced the library. So they had skin in the game to make sure we were doing things in a cost-efficient manner. Also, something I learned from Patrick Sweeney and the folks at Every Library, most of your large-scale library donors are not library users. So if you're working on a project that requires significant private fundraising, you want to make sure that project is appealing to the people that are funding it, who are not necessarily the people coming in the library every day. So that's why I separated out stakeholders there in terms of people. All right, funding. Obviously, that's a part of a project. We saw it at that was a chart on the big construction. So are there what funds do you need to accomplish it, and are there funding unknowns or unknowables? It's best, even if you don't have an idea of what something's going to cost, to try to get estimates. You can do that from other libraries, you can do that from contractors, or to put a number in, at least to start out with. I mean, you don't want to guess wildly, but to guesstimate rather than just leave it at nothing, because you have to start from somewhere. Finally, I called out that example of the general construction project again, those breakpoints, putting those in to your project if it's a multi-stage project is useful as well. So, all right, I'm changing hats a little bit to my facilities management hat, talk a little bit about creating a facilities management plan. So before I jump to that category, I want to make sure that if folks have questions about project management, that in general or specifically, that I have a chance to address those before we jump over to facilities management. All right, I'm going to jump right in then. Facilities management can be broken up, to me, into 4 categories. And the first 2 categories really help you not have to deal with the second 2 categories. So management maintenance involves routine and preventative maintenance activities. So routine is just like it sounds. It happens regularly. It's to keep the appearances up of the building, the cleanliness of the building and the grounds. Whereas preventative are all of those inspections that we pay so much money for, the elevator, the fire extinguishers, the fire suppression system, There's probably ones I'm forgetting about, wastewater potentially, and then caring for the facilities, the fixtures, the equipment. So things like the filters and the belts on the HVAC system, the batteries in your AED, and then if you have battery powered equipment, the emergency lights, things like that, the servicing of equipment. And so having a facilities management plan that includes paying for routine cleaning, painting, pest control, grounds, and then preventative maintenance oftentimes will save you money in the long run from dealing with those condition-based or emergency uh, facilities issues that come up. So condition-based maintenance or management are when you need to replace something, essentially. If it's gotten to the point where they've reached the end of their useful life and they either need major reconditioning or they need replacement. And then emergency, obviously, you want to avoid as much as possible because repairs cost a lot more when you have to do them right away. And the building oftentimes can't be used until those emergency repairs are completed. Um, we had a flood in the somewhat new building that I was managing, and it was a result of a couple of elements going wrong at the same time. And that was something that I don't know if preventative maintenance would have worked because it was a fairly new building, but it was definitely an expensive and time-consuming thing to deal with, to bring in an elevator guy and a Serve Pro on a Saturday. Dan, I see that you're here, and I know you've dealt with that too. So you know how much Serve Pro charges per hour. Um, not a cheap thing to have happen. But yeah, trick. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I wanted to say I've been there. um, so I will say though, it's good to plan for emergency maintenance as part of your plan, and really that consists of having already contacted all of those contractors who you may need to bring in ahead of time and having a relationship with them. So depending on what your building needs are, you're going to want to have a list, and I kept mine on my phone and in my pocket of plumber, electrician, septic, sewer, and all of the other tradespeople that you may need to call, and make sure that you have someone that is 24/7 available in case you do get that call. So having that in place really is a key part of a facilities management plan. Another thing I recommend highly is a facilities inspection, at least annually. I suggest inspecting all of the elements of your building. So that ranges from the structure, and you may have to bring someone in to do this, but you yourself are able to see if there's cracks in the foundation and know who you may need to call in. Mechanical systems, so having someone come in and make sure those are working as they should. The book stacks, the office, the grounds and the exterior space. More frequent is better. I'm going to give a shout out. I don't have the book with me, but there's a wonderful book, the Library Renovation, Maintenance, and Construction Handbook. We do own that, and it has a great chapter on maintenance that I'd highly recommend. Um, More frequent is even better. And I'll tell you a story of when I worked in a library, a large library system. It was actually the Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, New Mexico library system. We served 1 million people and had 17 branches. I was an area manager for several branches in that system, and we had a practice system-wide of the first person who opened the building every day, the manager in charge, and oftentimes that was me at one of the buildings, would walk around the building with a 5-gallon bucket and one of those claws to pick stuff up and pick up the trash that was on the grounds. It only took about 5 minutes, but it enabled someone every day to actually do a walk of the building. It cleaned up a little bit, but it gave us a familiarity with the grounds. And then at closing, we did the same thing inside the building. Whoever was there, who was the manager in charge at the time, would walk around the building, pick up any trash that was obvious that was there, and also just make sure everything was where it should be before they closed and the custodial crew would come in. And so in that system, all 17 branches, the days they were open, got an exterior inspection and an interior inspection every single day. And that really was a way for us to not just know what was going on in the building and tidy up a little bit, but it was also a great way to meet people, either your patrons who were there at the last minute or when you were walking around the building. It was great PR to be able to say, hey, I'm the manager of such and such a branch. It's nice to meet you. I'm glad you live here. Come by the library if you haven't been here in a while. So that's just a little tip from my prior experience. What questions do y'all have about facilities, management, planning, inspections, tradespeople? Myrna, go ahead, please.
So I noticed that you do not have a like the computers, internet in this checklist. Um, I mean, it is part of what helps us function. It's not, a light fixture, but if you don't have your internet checked for, make sure that your whatever antivirus and all that stuff is up to date, and shouldn't that be in that checklist for inspections or not necessarily?
No, I think that's a really good point. I think that that's something that's missing that should go in. Um, I would probably put that in the FF&E, the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, but specifically calling out computer equipment because we do so
Mhm.
much of that these days, and that's one of those services that's important that we provide to folks, is that networking, internet access, the printer, all the computers. That's a really good point. I think I'll add that for future presentations. Thank you, Myrna.
Okay.
We finished early. I never finish early, but we're 10 minutes early. That was my entire presentation. I want to give you a chance to think about and ask further questions, but I also wanted to say thank you for attending. And we have a whole slew of consultants here. I'm one of them. We have about 7 different consultants with specialties ranging from small libraries to youth services to accessible services to technology. So, Myrna, to your question, we have a Josh Muse as our technology consultant that are here to assist. So, if you ever are working on a project, if you want to work on a facilities management plan and you want some examples, or if you want to check out some of those books that I mentioned, we're here to help. I do have there's a short evaluation for this webinar that I've listed here. And if I can, let's see. Oh, I can't copy it and paste it right from there, but I will make sure to send it in my follow-up email to everybody to be able to fill out the evaluation so we can continue to offer these and improve them. But I'll give one last chance for questions, and if not, I'll let you get back to the important task of running your library. All right, well, thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and do let me know if you have any questions at all.